So it's my pleasure to introduce your first speaker, and there's a reason that Lynda Kuhn was invited to be a keynote speaker this morning. Lynda is the Senior Vice President of Sustainability and Public Affairs at Maple Leaf Foods. We're really fortunate to have her experience here. For more than 20 years, she's been in the corporate sector, and prior to that, she actually brought an anthropology background into that space, which I think is a really interesting background to have. But she's been at Maple Leaf Foods for 16 years and saw a really exciting transition that the company has been through. And so we're really fortunate that she's come all the way from Ontario to speak to us about her experiences, especially being able to represent such an iconic and well-respected brand like Maple Leaf Foods. So Lynda, I'd like to invite you up to the stage and share a few words with us.
Good morning, everybody. I guess it's my job to further warm you up. And it really is an honor to be here. It's what a profound opportunity to rethink kind of our economy and where we want to take this country. The kind of dialogue you're fostering I think is both important and urgent. Your purpose today is to reflect on the soul of the next economy. The central concept is that there is a next economy, different from the one that we have known through our lives. An economy with a soul. What a great thought. If the dominant business paradigm for the last 30 or 40 years has been maximizing shareholder value, the next economy surely must maximize what we call shared value. You probably know this concept developed by Michael Porter a decade ago. It's being increasingly embraced by countries and businesses around the world because shared value really understands the scope and responsibility of business more broadly, and I think provides a compelling path to growth. Underpinning this is the belief that business can thrive through addressing the most challenging social and environmental issues of our time. They can do this in three ways: by reconceiving products to meet pressing societal needs, and by serving underserved or unserved markets. They can do this by conserving resources to reduce costs and environmental impacts. They can do this by improving the available skills, supplier base, and supporting institutions in their communities to boost productivity and growth. Shareholder value and shared value do not need to be in conflict. On the contrary, a shared value model sees the corporation like Maple Leaf and others, finding ways to operate in a way that actually creates environmental and social good. I think one of the best ways to understand this is to understand what it is not. Shared value is not a conventional corporate social responsibility program. It is not working for a social license to operate, which can often be disguised as philanthropy. These represent costs of doing business. They're done out of some combination of generosity, sometimes reputation management. They often end up yielding a lot more virtue signaling and risk management than actual problem solving. The success of shared value creation rests on innovation and ingenuity. Depends on finding different and better ways of doing things. It means fundamentally changing the way we think about delivering sustained, profitable growth. I know this sounds hard, and believe me, it is hard. So what is the impetus to change? Well, because a business plan that doesn't take into account minimizing climate impacts, the health of society, is a business plan that's built on sand. Consumers will desert us. Voters, politicians, and shareholders will eventually turn on us, and ultimately, the business won't be sustainable. Equally important, but far less understood, is the value and opportunity that lies down this road. Re-examining current practices that with hard goals for improvement actually leads to lower costs and increased profitability. Aligning with the aspirations of consumers and the public creates new markets, competitive advantage, and loyalty. It's the tough job of the leadership team to find ways to monetize its pursuit of shared value, and where it can't, to rely on government to provide regulations that provide a level playing field. The pursuit of shared value unlocks hidden value, creating stronger businesses, stronger societies. Let's examine what that looks like in my industry, food. The food industry may not seem that controversial or sexy, but it is at the epicenter, at the very heart of some of the biggest issues of our time. Climate change, resource depletion, health, animal welfare, food insecurity. We all know of the impact humanity is having on the planet. Our carbon and methane emissions are changing the climate in ways that are being felt now, in ways that will become worse over time, and in ways that, if unchecked, will make our Earth uninhabitable. We know that ecosystems around the world are collapsing at unprecedented rates, to the point that we are currently in the middle of one of Earth's history's largest extinctions. Fresh water is increasingly scarce in much of the world, including North America. These effects are so pronounced that geologists have proposed the Anthropocene as a new epoch to designate the period during which humans were the main drivers of geological and ecosystem change. Nobody in business can know these things and just carry on as though they were irrelevant to us. But that is particularly true in the food industry. Agriculture is connected to most of the major environmental and social issues we face. The food system contributes almost a third of global greenhouse gas emissions, and livestock production is a primary contributor. Farming consumes 75% of fresh water used globally, and over 75% of agricultural land is used for livestock production. And that is all the current state. The world's population, as you know, is projected to grow by 2.5 billion people by 2050. Combined with rising global incomes, food, and especially meat demand is expected to almost double as more people join the middle class. This is not an indictment of agricultural producers and processors, although we need to make more changes in how we produce food. The problem is even more complex than just looking at production. The world and its growing population cannot sustain North American levels of meat consumption, which are almost 2.5 times greater than those of non-industrialized countries. And globally, a third of our food is actually wasted, never meets the human stomach, with all the resource strain associated with this, and wide disparity in actually who gets to eat. This has led to the perverse situation where there are 2.5 times as many obese people in the world as malnourished people. We must take responsibility for transforming our food system to one that is environmentally sustainable, that enhances health and well-being, that enables good food for everyone. And that means we must embrace and we must shift, not defend and resist the change that's required of us. Consumers are demanding changes in the food that we make. Armed with all the information, good and bad, that the internet provides, they want the food industry to move in a different direction. Deeply suspicious of anything unnatural, people dislike additives of any kind. They are rightly concerned about the proliferation of antibiotics and hormones in our food system. They think that more humane methods of raising animals is ethical and healthier. And more they are connecting environmental considerations with their food choices. These are largely the people who can actually afford to be choosy about the food they eat. In Canada, 12% of our citizens, that's 1 in every 6 children and 1 in every 8 Canadian households, struggle to just get enough to eat. That's 4 million Canadians who face food insecurity. A recent report on child well-being by UNICEF ranks Canada 37 out of 41 wealthy countries on the SDG goal of eliminating hunger, advancing food security, and nutrition. 37th out of 41. I think that's shocking. And it doesn't do justice to the emotional, physical, and financial impact on people and our society. Food banks are not the answer. This is a social justice issue. It's not a food issue. We produce way more food than we need in Canada. In a country as rich as ours, with the social values we embrace, surely ensuring every Canadian can access good, nutritious food is a problem that we can solve. So this is all a rather lengthy context for the core subject of this talk, which is how a business like Maple Leaf can transform itself, how we may be able to shift to the next economy we all want. Maple Leaf has a long history in Canada. We make many household brands. We are by far the largest producer of fresh and prepared meats in this country. We're also a North American leader in the emerging market for plant-based proteins. And we have been on a really exciting path of change. Faced with an aging set of small, inefficient production facilities, and with a somewhat sprawling set of product offerings, from cold cuts to bread to fresh pasta, Maple Leaf decided to focus on protein and to invest in facilities to build scale and ensure we could compete as a proudly Canadian company on a global stage. Over the past decade, the divestitures were significant and the investments were massive, way over $1 billion. But as vital as these infrastructure improvements were, our commitment to investing in the long-term health of the business drove us to think a lot deeper. What does it mean to be a world-class protein company? We needed our business strategy to be sustainable with all that that entails. A sustainable business would dramatically reduce all forms of environmental impact. A sustainable business would meet consumer needs for nutritious, affordable food that tastes great from animals that are raised with care. A sustainable business would see us operate in thriving communities. 5 years ago, we embarked on a journey to embed sustainability across our business through the lens of shared value. We deeply engaged our people to understand what sustainability meant to them and where we should focus our efforts. We were clear from the outset that sustainability was going to be part of our DNA. We developed a strategic architecture of better food, better care, better communities, and better planet. And we developed multi-year action plans with measurable goals. A year ago, we elevated sustainability from company strategy to company purpose. We defined our greater purpose, frankly, our reason to exist, to raise the good in food, and a vision to be the most sustainable protein company on Earth. Not Canada, not North America, but the Earth. It's a lofty vision, but that's what good visions do. They push, change, and they inspire people to work towards a common future. I can tell you that this purpose and vision have galvanized our people, and they are our most powerful recruiting tool. People want their work to have meaning. Working through a disciplined process, assessing what we are good at, what needs to change, how this links to profitable growth, we have a reason for being that extends beyond profits. We operate by our sustainable meat principles, which we developed after consulting with global experts in sustainable food systems. Sustainable meat is nutritious, healthy, and safe. This drove the reformulation of our entire Maple Leaf brand to remove all artificial ingredients. No artificial ingredients in any Maple Leaf brand product. New recipes were created with only natural ingredients, nothing you can't pronounce. It involved hundreds of products, and it is the largest transformation in the Canadian prepared meats market, giving Canadian families what they want: simple, natural, healthy food. And after the tragic consequences of our listeria recall a decade ago, we have implemented best practices and technologies that support our pledge to become a global leader in food safety. Sustainable meat is produced with respect, within environmental limits, and consumed in moderation as part of a healthy, balanced diet. It takes conviction and leaning into risk to be a meat company that advocates for people to reduce their meat consumption or eat in moderation. It's pushing us to broaden our business to offer plant-based proteins for consumers who are increasingly looking to diversify their diets. With the recent acquisition of Light Life and Field Roast in the US, we are now the North American leader in the fast-growing market for alternative proteins, with the leading brands in the refrigerated categories in the US and Canada. Sustainable meat comes from animals raised with care, with minimal use of antibiotics. We are transitioning our sows from confining gestation crates to humane open housing. We're supporting natural behaviors through enrichment in all of our barns, installing remote video auditing as a powerful training and verification tool, and investing in low-stress, climate-controlled transportation. None of this is regulatory driven. Years ago, we began to raise animals without antibiotics, requiring a really complex shift of nutrition and animal husbandry, and we are now the North American leader in pork raised without antibiotics and the leader in Canadian poultry. We will reduce environmental impacts on water and biodiversity, limiting greenhouse gas emissions and eliminating waste. Our goal is to reduce our environmental footprint by 50% by 2025. We are tracking ahead of that target, actually. It involves embedding conservation into every element of our business. But we know we need to do even better than that, and we are developing strategies that are going to push faster, greater change. To be sustainable, we must be responsive to the needs of society. In 2016, we created the Maple Leaf Center for Action on Food Security, a registered charity, with the goal to work collaboratively to reduce food insecurity in Canada by 50% by 2030, and there has been no progress on this issue for decades. We are investing in new approaches and partnerships with innovative organizations across Canada. Together, we want to learn what works, what doesn't work, and scale what works for greater impact. We're directing well over 1% of our pre-tax profits, approximately $5 million in contributions and commitments to date, to raise the profile of food insecurity, advocate for policy change, get political, fund projects, share best practices. So all of this is not meant to sound boastful. Truly, we are deeply aware of the daunting issues that face our company, our industry, and our society. We have big goals, ambitious goals, and we have a long way to go to reach them. Sustainability is by its nature an ever-changing ambition, and the bar is always going to raise. But the process we've followed has taught us that fundamental change is possible. Based on our experience, there are some principles that helped make it work. First, embracing shared value as a business strategy allowed us to see opportunity, not just cost. Our US business is taking off because antibiotic-free pork is a major differentiator for us in that market. Plant-based protein, although small, is the fastest growing segment of our business. Reducing our energy and water consumption is driving efficiencies and material significant cost savings. Going beyond conventional philanthropy to tackle food insecurity has allowed us to share ideas and learn from some of the greatest minds in the food movement. Second, any change of this magnitude must be championed by the CEO, and in a public company like ours, supported by the board. It involves significant investment, which often delivers a longer-term return. I'm talking months, not months, years, and in some cases, very intangible returns. This acceptance of long-term value creation can only be successful if it's led from the top. Michael McCain is a passionate outspoken advocate who constantly pushes us to meet a higher standard. Our board has been incredibly supportive. Third, as in everything, execution is key. Sustainability is baked into our business processes and rhythms with clear targets, just like any other part of the business, projects and accountabilities, ongoing monitoring, quarterly reporting on progress to the CEO. You know you are making headway when it becomes ingrained in how you routinely think about, talk about, and conduct business. We firmly believe this is the way of the future. On too many issues, public policy lags. Politics makes action difficult. It would be great if that changed. There is a role, a critical role for regulatory changes that advance a sustainable economy and establish a level, albeit higher playing field for everyone. But we all own this, and I believe that the dynamism of change can drive change. Business innovation, business expertise, and creativity applied to complex social and environmental problems is essential for our world, our country, our society. The future of our economy and our planet will be shaped by companies that embrace and lead change. Maple Leaf aspires to be one of them. Thank you. Now the fun part.
Yeah, can you hear me? Check. That's you. They're humming, they're turning on. Good. So I think the reason that you said this is the fun part is because I'm going to invite you to answer a few questions. Great. We'll put you on the hot seat here a little bit. Great. And I wonder, maybe we can, if the microphones will reach, let's move them up a little closer to the edge of the stage here.
Okay.
So Lynda has no idea what I'm going to ask her.
I know.
But that was a really excellent presentation, and yeah, talk about ambitious goals, hey? The most sustainable protein company on Earth. Clearly, I hear what you're saying there. You're saying, you know, this is really a move away from philanthropy and even community investment towards really investing in this grand purpose that you're talking about. And I'm wondering, can you just give us a sense of what was that process like to even develop a purpose like that? How long of a process was that? What was the inside baseball on that?
Okay, that's a. Can you hear me okay? Yeah, that's a great question and a very long answer, which I'll try to abbreviate. Well, it actually, you know, I think several years ago we tried to do different things that we thought were important, but I would put them under the lens of sort of conventional approaches to social and environmental good work. But I think what happened is that it was increasingly obvious that there was this interesting constellation of critical social and environmental issues and a shift in the market with consumers around, and I think, you know, consumer activation around and expectations around companies has really amped up in the last 5 years, and I think that's probably very consistent with the increasing impact of climate change and environmental issues and so on. So it's increasingly becoming important to consumers, I think, in ways that it wasn't in the past, how they think about brands that they align with and companies that they want to support. And that may sound like motherhood, and I think in the past maybe it was, but I think what we saw was that, no, this is real, and there is an opportunity for Maple Leaf to differentiate itself in the market in a way that actually is going to drive profitability. So it's going to enable us to try to calibrate and balance that whole notion of shared value. You know, and it became so powerful to us that about 1.5 years ago we thought, you know, maybe we should think about elevating sustainability from what was a brand strategy to a company strategy to now actually company purpose, and what would that require of us? what is it we would not do, what is it that we should be doing more of, what should we initiate, and you know, we went through you know, we retained outside experts, including the Boston Consulting Group. You know, this was a high-powered team of people who looked at, you know, the profit opportunities, the investment requirements. It was a very detailed process that culminated in that vision and purpose. So while it may sound lofty, and it is, it actually is grounded in some very good, you know, business constructs.
And you know, so often, right? You know, in my statement earlier, I was saying to people, you know, business is personal, but we also know that a company, especially the size of yours, is publicly traded. You're obviously, there's lots of investors who are moving money in and out of your company. How has the market reacted to you making this very bold statement?
That's a good question. You know, we don't have a lot of, I would call, you know, sustainable investors and ones that are really seeking out companies for that particular purpose. So we've got a lot of pretty conventional investors that own stock in the company. I think, you know, they probably start off thinking this is good risk management strategy. You know, a company doesn't, you know, provide, you know, good belt and suspenders around environmental, you know, processes. There's probably some money to be made here by reducing energy use. You know, it kind of makes sense, and they didn't probably have full visibility to the level of commitment and, you know, and therefore investment when we initially, you know, started off. But I think, you know, now we're at the point where people are connecting the dots between, you know, the commercial opportunities and the differentiator for Maple Leaf, and they see where the plant protein market is going. It's actually growing at something like 40%. I mean, conventional food typically grows at around 2 to 3% annually. You're talking about a very, you know, mainstream portion of the economy. It doesn't have wild levels of growth. So when you see a segment of the food market that's, you know, generating upwards of 40% growth, you're like, wow, this is a really interesting opportunity. And plant-based protein is about sustainable eating, right? And you know, I find it really interesting that one of the main things we can do as individuals is eat more sustainably. We think about the cars we buy and how we drive and so on, but you know, actual food consumption has a massive impact.
Absolutely, it
Sorry,
does.
I digressed a bit, but
Well, thank you for going there. I'm curious to know as well. You mentioned a little bit that some of the messaging, some of the activities seem to be attracting a different kind of talent pool. I'd love to invite you to speak to that a little more, but also maybe answer the question around, so if you're seeing a change in the kind of talent that's come into Maple Leaf Foods, how is it affecting existing long-term employees, and what about your suppliers? How are they responding to some of the renewed focus around shared value?
So in terms of talent we're attracting, you know, I think if you're a company that defines the kind of purpose and vision like we have, you want to attract different kinds of talent, right? You don't necessarily need conventional thinkers that are change averse, that are, you know, sort of married to traditional ways of doing things. We really do want to attract more creative solutions around sustainability and attract, you know, combining that with innovation. So it's been it's just incredible when we do job interviews. People say, you know, it's your purpose and vision that interests me, right? It's not working for a meat company or even a leading Canadian brand, although that's great. It really is an opportunity to, you know, think that I'm gonna make an impact here beyond just, you know, creating the next product innovation. So it really taps into what's important to people. Sort of the second part of your question? Suppliers. We actually haven't engaged suppliers very much yet. We, you know, when we created our sustainability framework, it was much more about taking care of things that we needed to address internally first before we'd start putting pressure on suppliers. So the first 3 years of that journey was a lot about creating within our four walls the changes that we thought needed to be effected. And we're now just starting to reach out to think about broader impacts, which I tell you, when we did consult with some of the global experts on sustainable food systems, and I'm talking WWF, Chatham House, Oxford University, Jamie Oliver Foundation, we talked to a lot of really, controversial, and I think people that pushed us, and they said, if you really want to think about sustainable food, you got to go up the chain to think about how crops are grown and the impact of that on climate change and water use and so on. So, it was, I think, we are now at the pivot point where we're starting to think beyond, our four walls to how we engage our suppliers more directly in this.
What's the greatest challenge you're facing?
Well, I think we're certainly far from perfect. So I think more and more embedding the notion of sustainability and shared value and how that links to how we run our business. It's not a natural thing for people who've been in the meat industry for 30 years to start thinking about, well, what are the environmental ramifications of investing in this equipment or that design or that technology or we constantly have to reflect on and bring that into the conversation, which is, we've made a sea change in the past 2 years. I think the purpose really does amplify that. We've now actually gone through an exercise which I led, where we're now saying with this purpose and vision, how do we need to accelerate change? And we now have a list of 30 actions that we have to follow. Some of these projects are in place and some of them have to be initiated, but we're now going to embed these in a scorecard where every month at every management meeting, we go through this list, we look at where we're succeeding and not, and that's how you really embed change in a business. It can't sit out here as a sustainability initiative. It actually has to be part of that regular business rhythm.
Thank you. So how many of you are using this app? Just show of hands. Anybody using the app already? Okay. I'm going to just take a quick look at if you have some questions that you'd like me to ask here. Feel free to use this app. Do I see one? Oh, there is one. No, not a question. Okay. Well, I invite you to.
Any question? I'm totally cool with anything you want to ask me.
Is there a burning question from the audience? I saw your hand first. Sorry, I meant the gentleman over there. I'm sorry about that. Yeah, we'll try and get to that as well. Yeah.
I'd say as a general rule, we tend to be fairly entrepreneurial anyway. It's a company with a very lean structure. The CEO, Michael McCain, has been there since 1985. He's a firm believer in transparency, so he's the kind of person where he'll communicate with people that are quote unquote several levels down in the organization. There's a constant free flowing kind of dialogue and very little respect for say politics and structure that precludes people from sharing ideas and thinking outside of the box. So I think probably the organizational culture and values of the organization help be a catalyst or provide a foundation for that kind of thinking. I think the purpose and vision now just kind of puts that on steroids because it really does defy sort of conventional approaches. And I'd say the dramatic shift in in the consumer market around food is just sort of, if you're not that kind of company that can shift readily, you just can't survive in this sector. So, does that answer your question?
So I didn't mean to exclude you earlier, sir, so please I invite you to ask your question as well.
You mentioned that it was a social injustice problem, not a food production problem. How is your new purpose and shared vision model moving toward the social or equality of the social injustice? How are you creating social justice?
That's a great question. Actually, it took us probably the longest time to figure out how we're going to think about connecting our purpose to our communities in a way that's non-conventional. And I spent several years talking to food activists and people in the food movement, and people who are involved in issues of food insecurity tend to be engaged more broadly in sustainable food systems and what does it mean to create a just society. It became very obvious to us that following a charitable model around, we have more, you have less, we'll give, whether it's a check or a food donation, we'll feel better, maybe you'll get some benefit out of it, was not going to go far enough to attack this social issue. And we got a slap on the head and a big dose of education around this is not a food issue, right? Although emergency food relief is critical, obviously, and is vital to people who need the food. You better be prepared to weigh in on advocacy, on issues of policy reform. Food insecurity is inextricably linked to poverty. Interesting that 60% of people who face food insecurity are actually in the workforce, so it defies our conventional stereotypes of who actually faces this problem of food insecurity. So, I think in that way we're trying to do it. We set up the center as a separate registered charity. We put people on the board who really understand food insecurity and would challenge our thinking. And we're trying to fund projects that are taking innovative, different approaches. And they are always pushing back on us around, trying to amp up our impact. And really, they do want organizations, corporations in the private sector to be more engaged, but they want them engaged in the right way, right? They want them to push harder for really positive change, right?
We'll squeeze in one more question from this end here. Go ahead.
I'd like to ask about corporate cultural change. I'm a management consultant. I've been working with a client for 6 months. The CEO is all about, we're a software company with purpose, wanting to do good things. But his number 3 leader was like, I'm in my 20s, I just want to do good code. It's all about money. It's about, I don't care about this purpose stuff. Have you bumped into that with some of your team? And what did you do to help people along the journey to understand business is more than dollars and cents?
Yeah. We've certainly bumped into cynics. When we actually we joined onto a campaign that's Meatless Monday, and we had people in our business look at us like we were like, I won't use the expletive, but it was like, have we lost our mind? Customers like, what? You want to do what? I would say those people who are change resistant in our case are not at the senior leadership level. They're probably, a couple of levels in the organization. And, when you've got a CEO that's so definitive around what we are going to be and the changes required, and then the senior leadership team of 15 people that report to him that are all embracing this, it sends a pretty strong message of either change or find another company that fits you better. And I guess the parallel I would put for that would be we have a strong set of values, and when we do our annual performance reviews, we have discussions with people in terms of their values alignment as well as their performance, right? And values trump performance. So when you have these annual performance reviews, that's the kind of place where this should come up, where people are passive resistors, change resistors, might be great performers. There has to be a mechanism to say, you're probably not best suited here, right? But in that kind of case, they got to be called out, right? They can't be happy. They probably can't be as happy as they should be, in that environment, and they're not going to excel in that culture, right?
Yeah, yesterday he went to a new company.
Oh, okay.
There you go.
Problem solved. Maybe.
So, Lynda, there's obviously so many more interesting things to talk about, but I can't let you off the stage without asking you. So, what was that conversation like when Maple Leaf Foods decided we're going to invest in insects?
Oh.
To tell us about some of the recent moves into that world and where that comes from.
Yeah,
Insect
we're
farm.
a minority, we're an equity investor in, we are equity investor, I think 30% in the largest cricket meal producer in North America, I think. It's an Ontario company. Well, insect protein is the way of the future, right? Anybody who goes to Mexico or other countries, it's just like it's part of a normal diet. It's not in our food. We had to be really careful. It's not part of the Maple Leaf brand. Really interesting opportunities to feed insect meal to animals who need protein. I don't think it's currently allowed under CFIA regs, but we're trying to move the regulator along. I think we're actually doing some pilots there. You know, the way of the future is thinking about insect protein as an incredibly sustainable source of high quality nutrition. There was no pushback whatsoever. People were like, wow, this is cool. Yeah, let's do this.
Awesome.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being part of this
You're welcome.
event and
That's great.
for
Thank you very
for
much.
being open to answering questions.